Welcome to Writer Syndrome, a podcast about writing from start to finish. I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me as always is Tim Ledney. This episode, we're joined again by Geoffrey Morrison, writer and photographer about tech and travel for CNET, Wirecutter, and the New York Times. You can also find his byline regularly at the Wall Street Journal and occasionally at Forbes. He's also the author of the sci-fi series Undersea and just released a nonfiction travel guide, Budget Travel for Dummies. Welcome back, Jeff. How have you been? How's it going?
Great to be back. Yeah, it's been a very busy and very interesting year since we last talked. A little more than a year, I guess.
I was gonna say, has it been a year? Holy smokes!
Yeah, right.
We should know this, but we don't. So you've got a new book, Budget Travel for Dummies. I know Tim has read a good chunk of it. I have not yet because I haven't got my copy. Wink, wink.
Soon. I promise. That was my bad.
No, it was mine. It was lost in email. I got so excited. I sent it immediately. So a kind of a transition from your previous novels, your science fiction, and this is going into the nonfiction route. How was that kind of transition? What kind of got you to this, to doing this?
Yeah. So I think as we kind of probably talked about in the last time, my day job, so to speak, was all nonfiction stuff. So I cover tech and travel for a bunch of different websites and newspapers and so forth. So a little over a year ago, it was actually the end of January last year, I got an email kind of out of the blue, really, from an editor at Wiley Publishing, which does the For Dummies series. And at first I was very skeptical because it was so kind of random, but kind of back and forth and a few meetings, and it was like, this was really happening. So it ended up being a very busy year, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
So Jeff, this isn't something you went out for. Did they just come across your other writing and your, professional life? Did they come across articles or blog posts?
I'm not exactly sure what specifically got them to find me exactly, but I mean, I do write for the New York Times and Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and a couple other places, and so my name is kind of out there for people to find in that way. And I guess they just thought it's like, this might be a good fit, and I hope people think it was.
Before we hopped on, you were kind of mentioning your approaches because it's a different beast from writing fiction, and I think we talked about this last time about the pantsing and planning kind of situation for this. So yeah, you're mentioning this had a little more planning involved, and yeah, talk about that and like how that kind of changed your perspective on writing from fiction to writing nonfiction, something like this.
Yeah, so I think it ties into one of the other things that I think we're going to talk about too. Is with my sci-fi books, it was, at least at first, it was just me. I mean, I was writing it without any publisher in mind or anything. I was going to write the book and then see what happened. This obviously came from the other direction, where the publisher approached me to do it, and they had a general idea of what they wanted, and then wanted me to kind of figure out what the specifics of that would be. And that was a great process. It was a lot of like, well, I think maybe this, and this. And they're like, well, what about this and this? Like, oh, that's a great idea. Well, then, and then a bit of back and forth in that regard. So because there's so much writing on it with very specific deadlines, right away, they knew when they wanted the book to come out. So we had to, everything was kind of backdated from there. It's like, all right, the book's going to come out the end of January, 2024. And when, this is February 2023, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a year away.
Yeah. And
then as soon as the deadlines, you start seeing the actual deadlines of things, like, oh wait, no, this is only a year away. You need to do all of this. So they, and I don't know if this is the same as with every publisher, probably is, but they're used to dealing with people who perhaps don't have the same relationship with deadlines that a professional freelancer does. That's my world. And I've always said that I feel like the reason why I'm a successful freelancer is because I never miss a deadline, or, almost never. So because there's multiple editors and multiple production people, and there's a whole company and printing and everything else, they wanted to know everything that I was going to do ahead of time. So the table of contents was kind of the first thing. Like, what's the general idea that you want to have for things? And then, okay, well, what are the subheadings from there, and so forth. So by the time I started writing in March, the outline of the book was basically done. I had already figured all of that out, and that was all the brainstorming ahead of time for trying to figure out, what's this chapter? Does that lead to this chapter? Does that lead to, oh, should I have something about this? And although we added stuff because they ended up liking kind of what I was doing, and so we can have a slightly larger book, so we need you to fill more pages, which is, a good problem to have. But before all that, it was like, okay, I had everything down to basically 1,000-word chunks, essentially. So at any moment that I needed to, as I was looking at it, and you see, okay, you need to fill 70, 80,000 words by, in 6 months, essentially. But each piece of it was like, okay, but that means I need to do this amount, and then all the way down to like, how much do I need to do each day? And so each day I'd go in and say, okay, well, I'm not really feeling this section. I'm not really feeling this section, but I could write a little bit about this, and then I just sit there and 1,000 words is not too difficult to write. And so that kind of gave me a different perspective on the whole thing with because with Undersea, it was very much seat of your pants kind of figuring out. And then it obviously requires a lot of editing when you're done and figuring out, okay, well, how do I make this thing more cohesive?
Yeah.
Whereas this, all of that stuff was done ahead of time. And it gave me a different perspective on it of like the creativity of the whole thing is more done ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And then when you're actually writing it, there's still plenty of room for creativity. Mm-hmm. But in some ways it's easier because then you can just kind of, what you need to do. And if you are feeling, okay, I'm in the mood for writing an action scene, well, what that action scene needs to do and where it needs to fit in. Or if you're not feeling that, if you're like, I'm in the mood for something more chill and dialogue or whatever, when to go and do that. So it's kind of changed my perspective on how I want to approach my next fiction book.
Interesting.
And kind of try it that way and try to do do more of the as much plotting as stuff as I can ahead of time and see how that makes the whole thing work and feel. I think at this point now, I think it'll be a stronger book. Mm-hmm. That's how much my perspective on this has changed. But I haven't tried that part yet. I've only done it with nonfiction so far.
It'll certainly be a faster process, presumably, right? If you're setting yourself.
Yeah. I mean, at least with the writing process side of it.
I'll say on this most recent, the budget travel book is that obviously the planning, since it's like a how-to book in a way, it comes through and referencing future chapters, it feels so tight and so structured, yet your voice is really prominent through this. It's not dry. It's really witty. It's really engaging. It's I found it to be a really informative, authentic read, which honestly I wasn't expecting coming into. I think my expectations were a little different. I thought it was going to be a little drier, but it's actually quite fun. It's a good read.
Oh no, please go on.
Well, I'll keep going. I'll tell you this. I was on the fence to travel. Yeah. And I was like, you actually motivated me a little bit to get off my behind and pull the trigger because I was, as you say, once in a lifetime is the enemy, right? Don't plan a once in a lifetime trip because that may never come. It's too big. Yeah. And you inspired me to do kind of a smaller trip because there was a lot of things. I was like, oh, we'll bring the kids to Hawaii, we'll go to Spain. But there were so many reasons why we couldn't do that. But I'm aiming a little lower, maybe U.S. Virgin Islands. And honestly, flipping through your book actually got me motivated to get those tickets. So
I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, that is my number one. That was the number one thing I wanted was to be a cheerleader for travel and for people to travel more. And if there was things in the book that could help people do that, even on some level, that to me was a success.
Definitely.
So that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. And to what you were saying of the voice and all that. I mean, that is something that they were talking about, that this is, I've read some Dummies books in the past and they do tend to be more analytical. Mm-hmm. But one of the things for this series, because there's actually 2 other travel books that were written by another author, that are they all launched at the same time. And they wanted to have more of that voice come through. And so there was a lot of stuff I did in there that was very kind of my writing humor that I didn't really expect to make it to print. And it did. So that was great. I mean, it's always a surprise. I've been doing this a while, and there's been plenty of jokes that I've written that I thought were hilarious that the editor just immediately gets rid of.
Yeah,
and there are reasons for that, and I don't know. Having seen both sides of it, it's like I get it. I get why someone would do that, but I tend to be more open to that kind of thing when a writer of mine, when I'm in the editor role, when a writer of mine writes a joke or writes something, and maybe it's not exactly how I would have said it, or maybe not exactly how the joke I would have phrased, but it's their voice, it's their article, I would let that go through, and it's like, hey, let people, do their own thing.
Since it's had like a year, it's like, that's a lot of time. It's really not when you're writing any type of book.
Yeah.
I'm curious now. So you get that day, like, all right, this is going out with end of January 2024. You get that a year before, and then you start kind of outlining your contents and the things you're going to touch on. What's the research look like for that? Because it's like, is there a point of like some things in the book here where you're like, oh, maybe I actually have to go do this thing? Or have you done enough of these things to put into the book? And like, how'd that work out?
Yeah. A lot of that research has been done in the previous 10 years of travel. That was something that was kind of, it wasn't planned this way, but January 15th was actually my 10 year anniversary for when I first started kind of traveling, full time essentially.
Yeah. Nice.
And I wrote my blog about it let me back up a little bit. So when I first started traveling full time, no one was paying me for travel. I just needed to travel, and I've written about that a lot. We don't need to go into it. See, people can find my blog for that one. But basically I was writing the blog as a place to write about travel before people paid me for it, so that I could approach an editor and say, hey, check out my blog. This is me writing about travel. I can actually do it.
Yeah.
And so after doing that for about 18 months, I was able to get Forbes to sign on. It's like, yeah, okay, you can write about travel for us. Sure. Now that was very convenient because, I was already writing tech stuff for them. So I already had my foot in the door for one side of it. So, I have certainly, kind of a tangent, but I have had people ask me like, oh, how do I get into doing travel writing, get paid for writing about travel? I came at it from a different angle, so I don't quite have that best advice other than just doing it. Yeah. And then because everyone wants to write about travel. That's a very popular thing to want to write about. But because of that, trying to get someone to pay you for it is very difficult.
Yeah, you already kind of established yourself with your blog, and you're like, I have this content, I've been doing this thing. It's like you kind of have to put this effort into like your future self almost by like writing this stuff and saying like, look, I can write. I've also done these things. I have experience with this. So
yeah, and when I've met people, through the years of traveling, I stay at hostels a lot, and I meet a lot of people, and that question comes up all the time, and people are like, oh, some version of like, I want to be a writer, or I am a writer. And I get excited. I was like, that's great. What have you written? What do you do? And far too often it's like, well, I haven't written anything yet.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, then you're not really a writer. If you've written something, like, I'm not a snob about it. I'm not gatekeeping this. Like if someone's like, oh, I just write for my blog. Hey, you're a writer. Yeah, that's fine. But if you haven't even done that much, you need to prove it. And that's the editor side of me going, it's like, well, I can't trust you to do an article if you've never written anything before.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I always come back to this quote. There's really no such thing as luck. It's when preparation meets opportunity, right? So you're prepped, you're ready. And you had kind of a side door into Forbes, but had you not done the blog, had you not traveled, you wouldn't have gotten there, right? Yeah. So you were prepared for that opportunity.
And I think that totally ties in with what Russ was saying, or asking about the research aspect of it, is that the reason why they approached me for the book is because I've been doing this for 10 years.
Yeah.
I've certainly done a lot of stuff that would not be considered budget, but the travel exists, and I was able to do the travel in general and for as long because I was able to learn how to budget this stuff and be able to do it affordably.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a lot of the stuff in the book is just lived experience of either myself or people I've talked to, or friends that I've traveled with, kind of all of that combined. But there certainly was stuff where I needed to do additional research because it was things that I wanted to cover and talk about, but I hadn't really done myself. Like there's a section in there about, I don't have much experience with buying package deals or all-inclusive stuff. And I wanted to be able to so I did a bunch of research there, pricing that out. What did that look like? What do those things encompass? And, and it was eye-opening of just how much markup is in these things. We've all you would assume that there's some markup, but I was able to kind of figure, okay, well, and I got a chart in the book about this. Like, all right, this is one place that I found that's pretty popular. I didn't mention any names because by the time people are reading the book, who knows what the prices would be. But it's like this, they were able, not only did this one company that everyone has heard of, list their price for the whole package, but they also very crucially listed the prices for or at least listed the hotel that this was going to be in, the airplane, the airfare, and so forth. So then I could go and like, what does that look like if I booked that by myself? What's that difference in price? And then go, okay, if I was going to do this myself, what are the prices of like, well, this is a similar trip for like half the money, you know? So yeah, so a lot of that was just one example, but there was certainly plenty of things in there that I needed to actually, you know, I've had the received wisdom or lived in experience, but that's just my experience. So what have other people had?
Yeah.
I'll say in the book, you seem to have a lot of lived experience with hostels. And I'll say that maybe there's even kind of a hard sell toward them. Can you guarantee that I will not be abducted by a group or a country club of men and hunted as the most dangerous game?
I told Tim he watches too many movies. I'm like, they're fine. You'll be fine. Go out there in Eastern Europe
He
and grab a
mentions it in
hostel.
the book.
Well, I mean, you're saying that being hunted like that is a bad thing, which
maybe
I'm
I'll
a
have a
little
new
surprised. I mean,
perspective on life, I think, maybe.
I mean, what is more fun than being chased down by a bunch of armed hooligans? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you and I have a different opinion of what's a good time.
Get out of your comfort zone, Tim.
Yeah. Hey, YOLO. Which is not how the kids say. Kids don't say that anymore.
No,
people our age pretending to be kids say that.
Yep.
Yeah. So that is one of the things that I am a huge proponent of and very strongly recommend, because two reasons. One, it is a fantastic way to save money on travel. You can cut down your budget by a huge amount staying in hostels. That by itself is not necessarily enough for a lot of people, especially Americans. I don't know where this comes from. It might be from those movies, but the average American, I feel like, has a very different idea about what hostels are and what they look like, what it's like to stay there. And I know this because I certainly did. So that was something I learned kind of on the road of what it's like to stay in a hostel and how there are good and bad hostels. And some of them are absolutely amazing and some of them are not great. But that's true of hotels too.
I wonder if it's like the false, not to go on too much of a tangent, or else you're going to need to edit this out. I wonder if it's like the false promise of suburban life in America, like the every king has his castle type of thing, that the idea of communal living is somehow failing. Like we're not sharers, right? We want our own space. We want to have our own little picket fence. Anyway.
And the way to test that, or at least, I mean, not test, but like, would let's say, New Yorker who lives in, Manhattan, not that there's a lot of average people who live in Manhattan anymore, but let's say Queens or Brooklyn or something, in a higher density area, are they going to be more open to the idea of staying in a hostel than someone who lives in a suburb of a small city?
Yeah, I wonder.
I don't
next
know.
book.
There's my research paper. So my first hostel, staying by myself, was a 2-bed in New Zealand, and it actually was not great. Not for any weird reason. It's just it turned out, I learned later, it actually just was not a great hostel. But then later on that same trip, I was in this hostel called the Dwellington, which sadly closed last year, in Wellington, New Zealand, and they really pulled me out of my shell. I mean, they were just like, hey, come have a drink with us, come hang out, hey, we're going to cook dinner. Do you want dinner? I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then after that, I stayed in this hostel in Melbourne, fell in with a bunch of great people. We went out drinking every night. We had this great time. And it was and from that point on, I started meeting people that I'm still friends with today.
Yeah.
So I can understand why some people might have a hesitation, because it is like, oh, maybe for most people, they probably haven't had a roommate in a long time, and they maybe haven't lived with strangers since college. I mean, there's certainly, and yeah, you lose a bit of privacy.
Yeah. I mean, that feels central to your book, Geoffrey. I mean, the idea of human connection and getting out of your comfort zone and meeting new people. I think it's why the book comes across as authentic as it does, that it's like, I really hope you go out to meet people. Like, and this is one of the best ways to do that. Right. And we talk about it all the time on the cast. Like, when you're writing, you kind of want to have a connection. Writing itself is a really isolating profession. Traveling shouldn't necessarily be.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And like, I'd say about half the people in my life right now are people I would not have known if I hadn't been traveling. And these are core, close circle of people including my current roommate, including my best friend. Like, these are people I met traveling. And before I started traveling, I certainly had friends in LA that I've known since college, really. But we all have our own lives, and they have their own lives, and I have my own life. And so meeting up is a challenge. So being able to travel was one aspect of it. Meeting people while you travel, another aspect of it. And I actually wrote about this early on in my blog too, where like let's say you meet 100 people. Well, not all of them are going to be your best friend. Most of them won't. Most of them you'll never talk to again. But some of them you will. Some of them, maybe you're just social media friends. Maybe some of them you share memes with and that's it. And others you meet up with, and others are even closer than that. And so it's a numbers game in a way. Mm-hmm. But even that's the case, I think most people listening, when was the last time you made a new friend? Like, that's a tough thing to do as an adult, because again, we all have our own lives. We're all doing our own thing.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Despite being on a podcast and traveling and meeting all these people, I'm natively an introvert. So it's very difficult for me to meet people and kind of come out of that shell. But once I'm out of that shell and people drag me out, it's like, oh, wow, I can find new friends. This is
surprising to me. You'd consider yourself an introvert?
Oh, 100%.
Oh my goodness. With the amount of travel and the amount of people you've made. So I consider myself an extrovert, but I'm like buried in the corner of my basement, not doing anything.
I mean, it is. Yeah, I don't know. I'm absolutely. And that's the weird thing, is that my native kind of what I revert back to very much is just doing my own thing, being off on my own, not wanting to interact. But occasionally you're forced to not do that. And so I can assume the role of an extrovert. And it was a tough thing. That was something I learned traveling, 100%. That is absolutely something that I had to learn how to do. And as a skill, really, of being able to, like, okay, I'm going to put that. Okay, I need to interact with humans. I need to brace myself. Okay, hold on. I can do this. Hello, fellow human.
I am a human.
Nope. Yes. My name is Morrison Geoffrey. It's backwards.
I would like a human interaction, please. Hello.
Yeah. Tim, you shouldn't have a problem with hostels, because I don't think this podcast would be happening right now if it weren't for a hostel. You and I wouldn't probably know each other if it weren't for a hostel.
Oh, yeah, but not because of me, because of my wife.
Well, yeah, but true, but
which is interesting because she is an introvert, but she is a traveler.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's certainly not what the podcast is about, but I mean that is something that is the people have the wrong idea about hostels, and the idea, finding a nice hostel where you want to go could save you. I mean, I say in the book, like, $50 a day will get you anywhere in the world, and that includes lodging. You could be pretty much anywhere in the world and only spend $50 a day. And I've done that in some of the most expensive cities in the world, and it's been fantastic.
I was going to get back into more the creation of the book here, and you're mentioning how there's a set deadline and whatnot. And you mentioned it briefly, but was there did they have in mind, like, hey, it's got to be this many pages or this word count? And were there any other restrictions that they had, like, during the creation, that kind of surprised you, or you're like, oh, okay, I kind of expected that maybe you wouldn't get from anything else?
Oh yeah. And that was something actually I found very interesting, coming from both sides of it, of the fiction side of it, being able to kind of do, the book was done when it was done, to most of the articles that I write now are for the web. So there's really not a word length thing. They had all of that stuff was basically planned before I was even brought onto the project. So they had the idea of what the size of the book is, which is different for Dummies book. Yeah. They wanted to go a different direction with kind of the old school Dummies thing, which for most people, they can picture it because they probably have one like these. These are the Dummies books are very popular. Yeah. Mine is much smaller than that. They wanted it more of a travel size. And so with that size restriction, they had a length in mind. So they kind of came to me and said, we want it to be this many pages, but that includes, front matter, back matter, blah, blah, blah. So it's going to be probably this many words.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of, from that, figure out, okay, well, if we're going with 12 chapters, what are those 12 chapters going to be? How long are they? And they were more flexible within those restrictions. So each chapter is not the same length, because certain chapters in there, they don't need to be as long. There's certain things to cover, but it doesn't need the same amount of length. So like some of the stuff on lodging or packing is going to be longer than the the ones on like how to get online. Like that's important, but you don't need 10,000 words for that.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything in particular? This is gonna be kind of a weird question because it's nonfiction versus fiction, but in fiction world, you got to cut your darlings and stuff like this. But in this, was there anything in particular like, oh, I wanted to fight for having this bit of travel tips in there or something, or were you kind of like, okay, we're gonna cut that, that's fine? Like, is there a kind of a different reaction to your writing going into something maybe it's fiction versus nonfiction, or
that is, I mean, that conversation did come up. For me, it was actually about photos. And I pushed really hard to have more photos in it. Yeah. Dummies books typically don't have a lot of photography because they're black and white. Mm-hmm. Right. And I pushed hard from the beginning because it's more of a hobby, but I'm still occasionally paid to do photography. And I'd have pictures in it. And I think pictures are an important part of it and really sell the idea of like, hey, look at this cool place. Don't you want to kind of stand in this spot and take your own picture here? Yeah. Or marvel at or not take a picture and just look at it. Yeah. So early on, that was a big push of mine. There was no pushback exactly, but they were kind of like, let's see. And I sent them about 5 or 6 test photos of like, this is the pictures that I want to use. And the editor's like, oh, yeah, no, we need to put those in the book. Oh, good. Okay. All right. That's good. But there was the point in, I want to say September, where they were, it had bumped up against a limit because obviously the pictures are taking up space. Yep. And then the words also take up space and there's limited space. And so they were like, well, look, we're probably going to have to cut a bunch of these photos. And I was very bummed out about that. So I spent a lot of like a week. So like, okay, well, I guess this one, we'll take that one out. But I don't know, maybe this other one instead, whatever. And then right as I had finished all of that, of like, okay, killed the darlings. Yeah. They came back and they said, actually, we've changed our mind. We're going to make the book longer. And we're going to keep all the photos in. We want to keep the photos. But that also means you're going to need to write some more. Well, that's fine.
You didn't tell them each picture is worth 1,000 words?
Yeah, exactly. Well, in this case, it's about 150. But yeah.
Should count against the word count, right?
Right. Yeah. But what I was able to add is actually something my dad wanted from the book that I didn't have space for. So as soon as we had the extra space, I put it in, which was an actual packing list. It's being which is at the back of the book, and it's like, this is here, bring this many underwear, this many shirts, this many whatever, because that's another thing that most people drastically overpack from what they actually need to bring.
Can I tell you that was very reaffirming? Because when you said 2 pairs of pants, I was like, thank God, because that's usually all I pack. And sometimes I think that's not enough. You also said do laundry, which maybe I'm not doing enough of.
Yeah,
that's the key. You can't bring it all. I think that's something I think that's an exact quote from the book. You can't bring it all, so don't. And just do laundry it's not even a day. It's 2 or 3 hours out of one day of a 2-week trip. Yep. And chances are there's going to be a day that you're going to want to just relax anyway. So at the hotel, at the hostel, wherever you are, they almost always have laundry facilities. Cost you a couple bucks or the equivalent. You get clean laundry. And that way, no one should be packing more than a carry-on. Like you don't need more than that. Yeah. I have gotten pushback occasionally from people saying, oh, well, you can say that because you're a guy. And I push back hard on that because the best packer I've ever seen was a woman who was carrying, she basically had a day pack, and that lasted her for 2 weeks. I mean, she was also half my size, so that probably makes the clothes were all smaller. That makes it a lot easier. But it is absolutely doable for anybody. And the exceptions, of course, like if you're going, you need to go skiing or multiple climates. I mean, of course, there's going to be you need more than that. But for the average trip, I'm going to London, going to Europe for 2 weeks. Okay. Yeah. Carry on. You don't need more than that.
So Jeff, this thing about author brand, right? And obviously this fits in really well with, your reviews, the articles you've written over the years, the blog posts. We spoke to an author couple months ago named JD Edwin, and she had expressed a concern about she had written a trilogy of fiction books, and then she was tapped to write kind of a how to write quickly book. And for the how to write quickly nonfiction, she wrote under a pseudonym because she was concerned about confounding brands maybe or confusing folks. Has that ever crossed your mind? Have you considered writing your fiction under a pseudonym or vice versa? Or do you think maybe that's something that's not worth doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've given it some thought. If I was going to do something that was a little out of character, then yes, I certainly would. I think I'd like to think for me, for my brand, I kind of write when I describe myself about like, bio somewhere, whatever, it's always, writes about tech and travel for, and then I list the outlets.
Yep.
So I'm hoping for most people, I'm sure most people know me from that. I think the fact that I've done a science fiction book is the surprise. But I also want to leverage the
audiences, right? That you build.
Yeah, the audience. I was going to say popularity. That's not really the right word. But yeah, the audience who know me from that are like, oh, he wrote a sci-fi book. Well, I liked his writing on headphones. Maybe he writes a good sci-fi book. But that is, I mean, for years, and I think I mentioned this last time we talked, for years, almost all my book sales were either, people coming into it. Maybe I don't know how else they found it, but the only advertising, so to speak, I was doing was at the end of my stories. I'd say, and Jeff also wrote this book. And I assume that's where people, because every time I would have an article that would do really well, the book sales would go up.
Interesting.
So I feel like I'm leveraging my day job to have a sales and sci-fi.
And you actually have analytics to back that up, right? Which I think is wonderful, that you're not necessarily splitting your audiences. There's some crossover. There's some bleed through effect between the two kind of different bits of content.
Yeah, I mean, one of the coolest moments I've had on the writing side was I was at an event at CES, must have been about 5 years ago. It's the Consumer Electronics Show. And I'm in my element there because that's my day job. That's kind of how most people know me. And I have had people come up to me and be like, oh, I read your thing in home theater or whatever. This guy just saw me.
That's cool.
Beeline came up to me and said, I love your book. And I was like,
it's awesome.
What a moment. But then he ran off. I was like, no, I have so many questions. Please come back.
Let me sign you.
I'll sign your forehead, like whatever you want. So it was so exciting. I cherished that moment because that had never happened before.
That's
people
cool.
Knew the book first. And it's like, oh my God, amazing. I'm actually going to a trade show next month for travel stuff. So that'll be interesting. I mean, I don't think the book sales are doing great, but not that great that people are going to know from that. But I am excited to kind of get to see what that interaction is going to be like at a travel trade show because I've never done that before.
I want to talk about the editing process a little bit and like that back and forth and what were the revisions like, and do they come back to you, or they just had a team of editors that just kind of crank through and they're like, okay, we'll come to you to see what you were thinking here, but we're going to take care of all this? Or did they have their notes, send it back to you, made adjustments, and then just had a back and forth with them?
Yeah, that was probably the part that I was most concerned about, having had editors who were heavy-handed and took out any number of jokes or personality. So I was worried about that, especially in a big company. They left it all in. Not all, but like the stuff that they took out, I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense that joke didn't land, or, oh, I should rephrase this to be clearer, or, oh yeah, maybe that reference to Spies Like Us doesn't work in a book in 2024. Okay, fine.
Doctor.
Glad I'm not sick. So that I was worried about whether or not I'd even see it. And so the way that it works, or the way that it worked for me, was I had deadlines to hit every 2 months or so. And that involved maybe, how many? 3 or 4 chapters, I think, for each chunk. And so as I would send that in, that would then go to a copy editor. And then the copy editor would start sending it back to the publishers, or my editors. They would go through it, and then I would get that back with both of their notes on it. And so then I would go through and just kind of, agree to the changes or make my own, additional changes. So like, oh, well, yeah, I should say it this way or whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of like, so there was some chapters needed more work than others. Some of it was pretty straightforward of just, so yeah, I'll change that number to this or whatever, to make it clearer or cleaner or whatever. Other stuff was them just kind of like, well, you should maybe think of this perspective and, write a little like, or, hey, I have a question now, so you should answer that question in the text. I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Good call. I don't think there was anything in the whole book where I disagreed with an edit. They were fantastic. The copy editor was amazing. And I'll tell you, like, having worked with copy editors for my whole career, obviously, a good copy editor is underpaid. I don't know, no matter what they're paid.
Yeah.
Because the skill of cleaning up the language without modifying the tone or style is an art. So my copy editor did an amazing job with that. And then the editors had really good questions of like, yeah, okay, I'll add that or do whatever. And then by the end of it, so that went through. They made the comments. I agreed to all of, were changed or whatever, sent those back. And then there was one more round of that where I got to see one or two more rounds of that where I would get to see kind of how the final text would be.
Yeah.
One of the things, so I had a bit of an overachiever, I guess. I finished early, which was, I did it on purpose. I kind of added more time because I was going to be traveling in Europe when the last deadline was going to hit. So I kind of wanted to finish everything before then. So because of that, everything was kind of pushed up a couple weeks. Yeah. And so they sent in, I want to say October. They're like, well, do you want to see the final text? We don't usually send that out, but we have time. And I'm glad because I was able to go to look at it one last time and then go through it and like, yeah, well, I should change it to this and whatever. So I was able to get that one final, finesse of everything after it was all done, which I was very glad about. And then also some of that stuff was now 4 months old. So I was like, okay, well, I've been able to sit on that, or I have new information and I can change it. So that was great. That was a great final process. I did not get to see the layout, which was interesting to me because on the nonfiction side, either most outlets I write for, I'm either putting it into the CMS directly or I can see it ahead of time. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so with the book stuff, I mean, when I was doing things in print with the magazines, when I was a lowly editor, I kind of made it I wanted to see this stuff just to learn. And then when I was an editor, obviously that was my job. So I was seeing it all laid out. Yeah. I had an expectation that I would at least see PDFs before print. And I wanted to, because I wanted to see, so the images in the book are black and white. In the Kindle version, they're color. If you have a color, if you want on a tablet or whatever. I didn't get to see any PDFs of the final layout. And the only thing I was really worried about that was the images. Someone was going to convert them to black and white. And I was worried how that would turn out because obviously it's my pictures. I want them to look great. So I didn't get to see any of that. And I asked about it and they said that they used to do that, but apparently too many of the authors were nitpicking stuff at that stage and it was delaying production. So I was like, well, I'm disappointed, but I totally understand why that would be the case. Yeah. So I didn't actually get to. They finally sent me a PDF of the final version that they were sending to the printer early January, I think, and that was the first time and that was still in color. So I didn't actually get to see the black and white pictures until the book showed up, a couple weeks before print. And thankfully, it all looks great. So I mean, they did a great job, and I shouldn't have worried and whatever. But yeah, so that aspect, that was the only part where I was really, curious, worried, whatever. Because I didn't. That was the only part that I was totally hands off. That it was like, nope, you've done your job.
Yeah.
What about the there's some graphic elements, right, Geoffrey, where there's like icons used for tips or, remember this. Mm-hmm. Did you break that up into sections or did they kind of parse out?
I put them in the text. I put most of them in the text. That was part of they sent I had templates that they would send in Word.
Okay.
Where it would show like, okay, use this format to do this and this format, to do this and this piece to do whatever. And so most of that was in. Sometime after that, the editors kind of put a few like, this sentence would work really well as a whatever. And I was like, yeah, perfect. So all of that stuff was in the text. And then the formatting of it, they all did that, So as you see it now, that was done later. But it was all stuff that I either myself or one of the editors thought would be a good little bullet point like that.
You mentioned before the kind of planning, doing a little more upfront planning. You might carry that over to your fiction writing. Is there any other things that you took from this experience that you might bring over to the fiction writing? And are you planning on writing another book? And
yeah, I mean, that's the first thing I'm going to try is more of the plotting. And I haven't quite figured out what that looks like for me yet, of how that's going to work in my brain. I bought some index cards, colored index cards, and I thought maybe I'd put them all on the wall and move stuff around.
Tim and I have been big fans of Save the Cat, which is kind of, I think, helped us both with like the beats. Yeah, you should check that out. But
I'll check that out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the main thing. When we were last talking, I was working on another fiction book, which I did actually finish. I had some
That's great.
people read it. I'm not one of the beta reader that I respect the most liked it the least. So, and his comments on it made a lot of sense to me. And it was stuff that I was like, oh, is this going to work? And he's like, nope. And I'm like, okay, well, so I have an idea of how to fix it. But it's been on back burner, obviously, because I was writing this book instead.
Yeah.
And this is separate from Underwater. Undersea.
Yeah, it's a separate one from that. Although I'm thinking now that like either I'm going to go back to this book that I already finished and fix it, or now with the plotting, I think idea, I've had the third book of Undersea kind of partially written and then in my head mostly written, and I'm thinking now like, well, I have an idea of what that's supposed to look like, so maybe I can plot this out and try to write it with this new method, since it'd be fairly low risk because I kind of know what the story is going to be.
Yeah.
And it's the third book in a series, so not that many people are going to read it anyway because it's the third book in a series. So fairly low risk. So I don't know. I'm not sure yet, but that's kind of, I'm thinking about doing that for this year.
Nice. Cool. Excellent. Yeah, I think, and we always end with this. I mean, what are you watching? What are you reading lately? Anything in note?
I'm reading some Terry Pratchett.
Okay.
Can never go wrong with Terry Pratchett. It's been that's been quite light and good reading. I've been trying to walk a lot more to be a little healthy, and I've been listening to, I'm just about to finish Return of the King. I've listened to all 3 Lord of the Rings books as read by Andy Serkis.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
It's amazing.
Oh, that's great.
Because he does all these voices and he acts it all out.
I bet.
It's incredible. If you can find and pick that up, I highly recommend it.
I'm reading that to my kids right now. We just finished the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
Nice.
We're moving up to the Denethor scene. But unfortunately, I am not as good of an orator as Andy Serkis is. So my kids are sound asleep, usually about 10 minutes in.
Nice.
I think that's it for our episode. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us again. The book you just released just came out, a couple weeks ago? Budget Travel for Dummies. You can get it anywhere, Amazon mostly, or is there any, anywhere you buy books? Yeah.
Pretty much just, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, kind of wherever you buy books. Local bookstores probably have it as well, or at least can order it, I would hope. Yeah, but awesome. Thanks. Yeah, this has been a blast, as was the last time. So this was, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming back, and awesome book. And thanks for motivating me to travel.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have to do this an annual thing. It seems like every year we'll have you come back on. Perfect. See where we are.
I love it. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, Jeff.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. So that's our episode. Thanks, Jeff, again for joining us, and thank you all for listening. Join us for our next episode where we're going to be. What are we getting into? We're getting into talking about gaming
narratives.
Yeah, I'm into it. It's gonna be a fun one.
I'm excited, dude.
Jumping a little outside of the usual.
That'll be an excuse for me to not write and play some video games before the next episode.
That's what I was thinking. We have to do research. It's called research, Tim. Okay, that's what they call it in the adult world. Okay,
all right. I got to do some research.
We got to do some research. So, but if you like this episode, someone that would send along to them. Sharing is the best way for us to be known. You can follow us on Instagram at Writer Syndrome Books. We're on Twitter, Writer_Syndrome. But you can find all of our episodes. Reach out to us if you're an author like Geoffrey Morrison and you want to chat and hop on, or if you have ideas, topics, you can find all of that stuff more at Writer Syndrome.